There is wailing. I don't know if there's gnashing of teeth, but there's wailing.
We've got too many caps to gnash teeth. So,
well, I did. Really, you got a lot of crowns.
I got some. Yeah, I do.
I do too. I grew up with no fluoride, so I blame it on that. Probably I didn't brush my teeth well too growing up. You know, my parents would ask me, "Did I brush my teeth?" And I always thought that was singular. You know, or maybe two teeth. So I'm sure I was at fault as well. We're talking about a transition that is about to take place over the next 3 episodes. Mark and I are going in different directions. That sounds like it sounds like a divorce. I'm trying to make this. I'm trying to
decide whether you want to live with me or Tom. So.
Our shared custody is what we're going to. That's what we're going. We'll talk about this in the episode, but Mark and I are good friends, and this transition and another path is a very natural transition, and we want to talk about it. If anything,
I'll tell you what it is. Frankly, I showed up at your office at Lifeway 4 or 5 years ago, and I had just written a book, and I didn't have any exposure at all trying to talk about replanting, and you platformed me, and you gave me all of your exposure, and you gave me an on-ramp to communicate this important message. And now you've given me an on-ramp to take this podcast, really, the Revitalize and Replant, and take it really on our own. And so,
you're gracious to say that. Mark, your platform would have grown regardless. And when I say platform, I mean it in the healthiest sense of the word. You are respected and loved by so many who had really seen local church as a hopeless situation, and you've given them hope, and you've given them a shoulder, and we're going to talk about all of these things. I do want to mention, Mark, my gratitude for North American Mission Board as well as you, because North American Mission Board has paid the bill for this from the very beginning. It started off with me, and then me and you every other week. So I was doing it by myself. Then it became me and you on a regular basis. Then we brought Kevin Ezell in, and then we transitioned, and we are back to me and you. Now, after all of these years, you're right. You don't need anyone to get the message out. You have the platform, and that's just a good transition. So we'll talk about where you're going. That's actually in the last podcast. I know we're going to be tempted just to get ahead of everything, but by the time we get to the third podcast, we're going to be talking about everything. Now, I will let you mention in this podcast, of course. I do want you to mention where they can.
It's pretty simple. Just go to revitalizeandreplant.com. You go there right now, and you can, when this podcast is over, you can listen to our pilot episode. And then 1st of April, we're going to come on 2 times a week. But you can go to Revitalize and Replant and subscribe. You can be a charter subscriber, like a charter member of a church. And that way, when you throw your weight around because you're a charter member, that's how.
Yeah. I am charter with Mark. Wow. You may need to get a charter hat to go along with International Harvester hat at times, Mark.
Might do that. That's right.
Or an International Harvester hat that has charter underneath it.
I don't have it with me. I don't know if I can find it before the next podcast or not. We got a brand new International Harvester hat, and instead of having the NAM logo like this one has, it actually has it says Replant NAM. Has a replant logo. Now,
that is so cool.
Now, in the bureaucracy of denominational life, when your team is able to put its own brand on a piece of swag, you've just upped it a notch. So,
I got that.
So we're real excited that it's not only NAM, but it's Replant NAM. So the new hat has that. And so we'll just confuse everybody. If you want a hat, you go to replanthats.com. Pretty simple. They're free. Replanthats.com. All right, we're done. Okay.
Tell them to post it on social media. Something. Do you a favor and show
that'd be great. Yeah, take a picture of it and put it on social media. Sure.
I remember getting socks from one of our ministry partners that was their company name on it, and he said the only reason I'm going to give it to you is because I know you got a big following on Twitter and Facebook. So you post your socks there. Said, okay, I'll post my socks there. They were good socks too. Mark, I want to take time on this issue to talk about how this podcast began. And that would mean you and me personally coming together, but it also talk about why the need was there. So really two components to it. When you start something, there should be a vision for what you're starting, or at least a plan, hopefully a vision. And you and I saw and knew that a lot of churches were struggling and they needed hope. They needed to know they weren't alone. They needed to know that there were possibilities to turn things around. And they needed to know that one of the bigger options out there was replanting. We call it adoption, but replanting is fine. And that became the need. It wasn't just a perceived need. We were seeing it out there. And I recently wrote an article. I don't even know which one. So Alana, if you're listening to me, don't worry about linking because I'll never remember it and I don't want to look it up. But I recently wrote an article about the growth of the discipline of revitalization, or at least it was in an article. And it's been absolutely amazing. I would have never predicted that there would have been degrees in revitalization and professors of revitalization and major state conferences and regional conferences and national conferences on revitalization and replanting and adoption, all of these things. And it's how much we contributed to the growth of that doesn't really matter, but we have been a part of that. And we have watched this whole thing about revitalization grow and grow. So talk to me as we begin to say our final goodbyes in this first episode of how we got together, both the need and us personally.
Well, together, Jonathan Howell read my book. And I'd never met Jonathan, and I'd never met you. I've been in meetings with you in a group setting, but never met you one-on-one. And Jonathan just read my book. I didn't know he read it. He of course, he worked at Lifeway at the time. And he reached out to me and said, hey, he does this podcast. He did the podcast back then. What was the one he did? You remember? With he had a podcast, Jonathan did.
I thought he did one with
or something like that. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. He still has that with Amy.
Yeah. So he invited me on that podcast and interviewed me about the book. And then he came to you and said, hey, this is a really good book. And, you had, at that time, you were doing Rainer on Leadership. And
which is still am.
Yeah. I didn't mean sorry. Anyway, and you don't interview a lot of people on that. It's not like every week you have an interviewee. So,
absolutely not. It's a different format.
And so it was he convinced you that this book and was probably worth talking about. So I remember I came down to Lifeway and met you really for the first time, and we had that first encounter, and we kind of hit it off. We just realized, hey, we're speaking the same language, and we both care about the same thing. So then a few weeks later, I'm reading a lot of your blog posts and following you on Twitter, and you're saying some amazing things about dying churches, and everything you're saying, it just resonates with me. And you've got this huge platform out there and all these people that respect you and from all the years that you've been out there. And I was sitting home. I remember exactly where I was. I was on the couch with Jill. We were watching Monday Night Football. And I have a relationship with Kevin Zell, the president at NAM, that we're just, I can call him anytime. So we're buddies. So I just called him at about 10 o'clock at night. And I texted him and I said, hey, you got a minute? And of course, he immediately called me back. And I said, hey, man, I'm looking at everything Rainer's doing here. And it's exactly what we do. It's exactly what I want to do. At that time, you were president of Lifeway. And I said, here, he's at Lifeway. We're at NAM. And we might as well figure how we can maybe join these messages in some way. And he said, I agree. And I think he texted you right away or something, because within 30 minutes, he got back to me. It's about 11 o'clock at night. He said, how would you like to do a podcast with Dr. Rainer? And it's like, it was that quick, And,
a podcast that didn't exist.
That's right. So he was committed to it and you were committed to it. And that's how we got together. And I love the idea, guys, as you're listening to this, that rather than maybe two entities, really large entities at that time, Southern Baptist entities, North American Mission Board and Lifeway, each sort of trying to compete for, talking about the same thing. We just said, no, man, this is important for churches, and we'll merge our messages in a sense so that they'll know we work together to help these churches. And that's where that came from. And then out of that grew a real friendship and brotherhood between you and me, and great respect. And everything I said earlier about how you were just so generous with your social media platform and your exposure, and really giving the message that I wanted to get out. So the end of the story is 5 years later, like you said, I had lunch this week with one of our seminaries, Southern Baptist seminaries, the head of the doctoral program, and I said, "Do you offer a D-Min and revitalization?" "Oh yeah, we do." As if everybody did that.
Sure we do. And
I
we
mean,
teach the Bible, and we teach the Bible here too.
that was that would not have happened a decade ago. Okay. And so all these seminaries have revitalization D-Mins, let alone other graduate degrees. And then you've got, like you say, all these regional conferences. I'm speaking to the Free Will Baptist National Conference coming up not too far from now. And I've been working with the Free Will churches. I've worked with the Nazarene churches. I've worked with some Assembly of God churches. And they're all using the same language. They're all talking about helping dying churches. It's bigger than just one group. And so what that means is this is the movement of God in a very real sense. And you look at it that way, and man, Christ loves his church. And it's just an honor to be part of trying to work with these churches that are struggling. So that's how it all came about between you and me. And then for the last 5 years, we've been doing this and writing stuff together and speaking together. And it's just been a real joy.
Well, Mark, you and I, for the most part, were recording podcasts in person. Occasionally we would do podcasts, but our default was in person. You came to Franklin at times when I was at Lifeway. You came to Lifeway. I came to NAM and recorded in their studio. And then COVID hit, and we've hardly had any in person. You're in Kansas. I guess you're in Kansas right now.
Yeah, I'm in Kansas.
And I'm back in Franklin in my house. It's in my kitchen, the big clock behind me. By the way, you see those paintings, Mark? Can you see them?
I do see those paintings. Did your wife paint those? Did you paint those?
She painted those. Look
those
at that.
Beautiful. Those are great.
You got to watch this on YouTube, guys.
Yeah, see that right there? There you go.
I can't see yours clearly.
My wife did not paint that.
What is that? No, it's kind
fruit.
of blur. Oh, it's fruit.
I thought it was room.
Yeah. Okay, it's blurry, and I thought it was a kitten who had thrown up.
No, we bought that at like a flea market kind of thing for next to nothing. We get it home, and it's a real oil painting, and it's beautiful.
Wow.
It's not a copy. I know, it's really cool.
Now, I was not denigrating the painting. I was just saying I can't see it. It's blurry, and so I see this figure, and it looks like a white cat that's throwing up.
Every time I see that while I'm sitting there eating dinner, I'll think of that now. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, it does sound like you had a beautiful painting. So we met, and as I indicated earlier, we started off with Thom one week, then Thom and Mark the next. We were alternating. Eventually, Kevin Ezel came on, and so we were going Thom and Mark, and then Thom and Kevin, and then came back to you, Thom and Mark. And so you and I have been the constant in all of this, and now we're ending this as the constant as well. And by the way, if you're just chomping at the bits, listeners and viewers, I know that. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? So we're not going to get into this until we get to episode 295, which will be the final. Did you hear that, Mark? 295.
295. And so what that means is that in the future, sometime in 2023, you come on Revitalize and Replant, our podcast. We'll do another 5 so we can say we hit 300. So that we'll do something like that. But you're right. Before COVID, we did them all live. I came to Nashville or Franklin, and we'd go to lunch together. We'd spend the whole day together. I'd come in the night before. And I think that really helped a lot. I mean, it wasn't just like now we get online and we look at each other, but we've spent a lot of time together. And so that really helps a great deal. Also, the technology really in the last 2 or 3 years has improved so much that you can do it online and sound just as good as you can in person. That wasn't the case maybe 5 years ago.
That was not the case. And the reality of it is we two introverts enjoyed being with each other.
We did, because we could sit there and not say a word to each other.
Yeah, we could just look.
We didn't even talk to each other during lunch, and that was nice.
It was nice. By the way, I did the math on this. In order to do 295 episodes, it would take you 5 years and 8 months.
Okay. So we've done a lot.
I don't think we've done it any more frequently than weekly. So we almost hit 6 years on this. And for a podcast, and again, Mark's already said, Revitalize and Replant is going to continue. My podcast that I'm going to take is going to be called the Church Answers Podcast. That's what we're going to cover a little bit in the 2 more episodes from now. So stay tuned for that. But 5 Almost 6 years. I mean, that's an incredible run. And the good news is Revitalize and Replant is as strong as ever as it goes to a different platform or as it goes to a different guest host that Mark will tell you about in the third episode as well. So Mark and I have been together as friends. And one thing that we have committed to, not because we have any sense of obligation, but we want to continue to interact with each other. Every time I listen to Mark, I learn something. And it's usually what I call anecdotal learning. And that's some of the best learning because he can tell me what pastors are saying and how they're feeling. One of Mark's spiritual gifts is mercy. And it really fills the void for the gift that I don't have there. And I listen to him and he talks about pastors who are hurting and he gets it. You just totally get it. I get it because I hear it so much, but you empathize a whole lot more with it. And what the audience gets when they hear you, Mark, they are hearing someone who gets them and not only gets them in their job description, but gets them in their pain. And there's a lot of it out there.
Yeah, there is. And sometimes it gets me. I kind of live in that world sometimes. And so it sticks to you sometimes. So, you empathize a lot with folks and you feel their hurt, you feel their pain, and it's out there. But there's also, man, and I try to tell guys who are in hurt like this, man, I mean this with all sincerity. The deeper the pain, the deeper the grace you can feel. I mean, the deeper the pit you're in, the more God's love can fill that pit. And being in a position where you're in they're putting you in a meat grinder in your church and people are really treating you poorly and your finances are wrecked and all of that stuff. It's just it's an opportunity to simply draw closer to Christ, lean more into him, not into your own ability or to what people think of you or how big your church is. And in some ways, and I mean this in all sincerity, when you look back on your ministry, the sweetest things are those times when you just fell into the arms of Christ, not when people applauded you and said, "Oh, you're a great pastor," and all that kind of stuff. So in a way, you just have to look at it and not grow weary in well-doing. And you just need some people to come along and affirm that in your lives. And that's kind of one of the things I try to do. Jill and I were in San Diego not long ago, and we went on the aircraft carrier that's out there. You can tour it. It's really neat. I think it's the Hornet. It's really cool. And there was a guy who actually worked on the aircraft carrier during the Vietnam War. And his job, and he was doing a tour for us, and his job was to bring in the planes when they landed on the carrier. And of course, they have the like a red light, a yellow light, and a green light, right? And he's talking to them. He said at nighttime, he said, in fact, when they put they could tell by their respiration and heartbeat and stuff that the anxiety of a pilot was higher when he was landing on a carrier at night than when he was doing his bomb run. I mean, it was so.
Wow.
Landing on a carrier at night in a pitching sea, you got to get that hook just right and all that stuff. So he said his job was to call them in. So he'd be on the radio with them and he would say, "You're looking good. You're looking good." And he'd see that, the light would be over on yellow. He'd go, "Yeah, maybe just a little to the right. Let's go." He wouldn't say right, whatever, starboard or whatever. I don't know, but just a little to the right. Okay, great. Look, speeds, maybe just a little faster. Okay, just a little bit to the left. You're looking great. And he said, he kept saying, "You're looking great. You're looking great." Just a little here. And he said, the last thing you want to do is say, "Oh my gosh, you're coming in too fast." "No, you're too far to the left." And I think sometimes my ministry is to talk to guys and say, "Hey, you're doing well. Just maybe a little bit this way and maybe slow down here, but you're really doing well." Because you just want to encourage them all the way in. And sometimes they get yelled at a lot and told they're doing things wrong a lot. And that's just kind of my opinion. So.
Oh, that is a great analogy. I mean, that's Top Gun material.
There you go.
That's good stuff. I love hearing that story. I'll probably repeat it. I hope my old memory will allow me to give credit where credit is due. But
that's all right.
Well,
I don't give credit. Half the things I say came from Richard Blackaby, and I don't give him credit, so it's okay.
So, Mark, you mentioned some of your own struggles that you have been very open about: depression, the dark moments. I don't think we've ever talked about it being your thorn in the flesh that God has used for His glory in that type of biblical metaphor. But it sounds like He's taken your weakness and made you stronger and helped others in the process.
Yeah, I would say that's very, very true. The identification that I've told you before, I'm 63 now. When I was 50 and below, I would never have shared with anybody that I had any struggle emotionally or with depression or anxiety. I would never have shared that with anybody. Would have been too afraid to. I would have felt like it would have hindered my opportunity for ministry. I just wouldn't have done it. But when you get older, you have some perspective on things. And so, yeah, and it wasn't something I set out to do and say, I'm going to make a thing out of this. It's just sometimes as I was leading a conference or speaking, it just came organically, just kind of talk about my own personal experience. And then the avalanche of people who came up to me and said, I needed to hear that. I preached at the pastors conference, the Alabama Southern Baptist Pastors Conference a few months ago. And the topic they gave me was something that was called something like, working through depression or discouragement or something. So I'm the discouragement guy now. So that's
no, you're the transparent guy that gives people hope because they think they're so alone.
Yeah. So I talked about it. I unpacked it and even about the reality that I've actually known pastors personally who've taken their own life, and we can't take this lightly. And then afterward, this lady came up to me, this young girl, and she was like crying. And she said, my dad was a pastor and he took his life. And no one has ever really expressed what you just expressed, and there's just so much out there. Satan is so much at work trying to, you can just look and see he's constantly at work and he's really focused on us. And so, Martin Lloyd-Jones wrote a wonderful book called Spiritual Depression. He was a doctor and a pastor. And Lloyd-Jones understood that there was a tendency in some of us to be depressed, whether it's clinical or whatever. But there was a physiological tendency toward depression. And what he says is that Satan doesn't give you a pass on that. He sees that as a weakness and he drills down on it. So when you know you have that tendency or that perhaps even medical condition, you have to be fully aware that that's going to be an area Satan's going to really work in. And so you have to be very conscious of battling that with your doctor, with your diet, with all that kind of stuff, but also certainly with scripture and with other men who can come in your life and encourage you. And you got to have a plan. So yes. And so I'll be honest with you. You don't really ever get this side of heaven. I don't think I'm ever going to get over it. I don't think I'm ever
going to deal with it.
No, it's never like, oh, I used to be that way. And it has nothing to do with what's going on in my life. I can have, in fact, sometimes I can have a lot of crisis in my life and actually function better because I'm sort of in a crisis mode and there's spiritual adrenaline running. Okay. But it's in those daily drudgeries sometimes where it's hard to explain. But Winston Churchill used to call it his black dog. And he would say, he called depression his black dog. And he would say, I can see the black dog coming. And you know that. I know that feeling. It's not here yet, but you can feel it coming. And then Churchill would say, the black dog is with me. And wherever I go, no matter if it's a good day or a bad day, I got this black dog. And then Churchill would say, one morning I'll wake up and the black dog's gone, but I know he'll come back sometime. There's a real picture of that for those of us who go through depression. There's no real set reason why. And again, it's Satan really works on us at that point. And frankly, sometimes men are called into ministry because they empathize with people. They're compassionate and that can lead toward that as well. So this isn't a whole topic about that, but
it is a reminder as we go through the finale of the Thom and Mark Revitalizing Replant podcast. It's a reminder of what you have offered to those who have tuned in. And it's just a good reminder of the value that you have in the kingdom of God. So it is very much appropriate. Just one more reminder. Mark is not going away with Revitalize and Replant. He is going, and he'll have others who will be joining him. But just go to revitalizeandreplant.com and you can sign up there and be ready to go. And if you are signed up here and you've been listening here, which means where we are broadcasting right now, the Church Answers podcast will be at this point. Right now, I'm doing it solo. They're going to be pithy 10-minute podcast, sometimes funny, sometimes practical, and then sometimes just totally useless and worthless, because I know that there are many times that I produce that kind of content. But we'll be coming back to you. This has been episode 260. What is it? 93. Oh, get your
Mhm.
glasses on, Tom. 293. Almost made it to 300. We're going to come back next week, if you just listened to it on the first day, episode 294, and we're going to talk about some of the highlights of this podcast. Maybe we say lowlights, but there just hadn't been that many highlights of this podcast over the years, and we'll be back. So come back to Revitalize and Replant next week, and we'll get to episode 294, the highlights, as we begin to wind down this partnership between Mark and Thom, and we'll talk to you later.